Open with me this morning to Philippians chapter 1. Again, it's a blessing to see everybody that is able to be here, and I'm thankful again that those who cannot be with us in person at this time can connect with us and study with us online. I've been very pleased with that, especially for some of the widows and elderly that are unable to be here. Even though I'm missing their face, knowing that they're still able to in some way connect with us has been a blessing. But I ask with you to turn with me to Philippians chapter 1. We're going to begin reading in verse 9 and read through verse 11 as we discuss continuing to grow. Let's begin reading in verse 9. And this I pray, that your love may abound yet more and more in knowledge and in all judgment, that ye may approve things that are excellent, that ye may be sincere and without offense till the day of Christ, being filled with the fruits of righteousness which are by Jesus Christ unto the glory and praise of God. Again, remember that the Apostle Paul is writing to a church that he considered his joy and his crown. This was a church that stood out among all other churches, one that when he thought of them, it brought him great joy. Now, we all know that every church we think about doesn't bring us great joy. Every person we think about does not bring us great joy. So this stands out to a large degree that when Paul thought about this assembly, he immediately had a warm heart. It made him feel good to think about this place, to think about the city, to think about this area would bring his attention and his mind to a group of individuals that just made him feel good. And so as he's writing to these people, he's getting to this point to where he's finishing out his prayer. Now, we've already seen the introduction salutations, how he mentions who he is, who he's writing to, and then he begins to pray that they would have continued joy. And moving past that, he's going to pray a specific prayer for them. He's going to begin praying for their continued growth. You'll notice how he says, and this I pray. He's continuing with his prayer all the way through verse 11 as he says, and this I pray that your love may abound. He's going to focus in on one essential aspect of his prayer life for them, that he wants them to experience continued growth, continue movement forward, continuing to not just sit stagnant or be happy with where they're at, but to move forward into a specific direction. I find this interesting that Paul opens up his heart as a window of prayer here because he prays not only for their joy, but they would have abounding love, that they would continue to move forward in a specific direction. And this also involves knowledge. Paul always showed us how his prayer for the church would be spiritual growth, whether it is to the Ephesian church that he prayed that they would come to a more full knowledge. You can see multiple times he prays that people would have a closer walk with God. And that is one thing that ministers should be focusing on is, sometimes we see a market-driven view of church and it sometimes loses sight of the people. What can we do to get more people from out there while losing sight of the people that are in here? And you see, the mind of a minister should be that all churches would have a greater knowledge of Jesus Christ. Paul always had a focus on the people, a pastor's heart, that it wasn't about him, it was not about what he could do, but it was always about how they could grow closer to God. That was his focus. And as we go from him looking earlier about how he looked to them and thanked God for them, they were his joy. He was happy to make requests on their behalf. He was thankful for their fellowship. He was thankful that God, which had begun a good work in them, would continue that work. And now he's going to begin praying for their spiritual walk with God. Notice in verse 9, the first thing that he mentions is continuing growth. And this I pray, that your love may abound yet more and more in knowledge and in all judgment. He first prays that their love may abound. Now, what kind of love is this? I believe it probably encompasses more than just one aspect. You find commentary sometimes mentioning this is love for God, where that's true. Or maybe this is Paul saying he hopes that they would maybe love other people more and more. I think it probably holds both because you don't have to segregate the two and say, well, it's just for God or it's just for people. Even in Matthew chapter 22, when Jesus was asked in verse 36, what is the greatest commandment? The first thing that he says is, well, what is it? It is to love your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. And what is the second? To love other people, right? So those two are always connected together. There's a reason why almost half of the Ten Commandments deal with your relation with God, and the other deal with how you treat other people, because they shouldn't be separated. The way we love God and the way we love people are also connected in the fact that you can't claim that you love God if you're not loving people, right? I love you, God. Now let me go curse this person down the street or on social media, or let me go really, get to them, right? And you can't claim you love people if you don't love God. Why? Because love stems directly from God. You cannot truly love in the sense in which the Bible describes it without first loving God. And so they're intimately connected together, loving God and loving people. It's something that we shouldn't separate. It's something that comes together. And here, Paul, when he says, I'm hoping that you grow in love, also notice that he's not just sitting there saying, well, you've loved enough and you've gotten to the point where you don't have to do it anymore. When he uses this expression, and this I pray that your love may abound, love for God, love for other people, I hope that you would love more. He's saying that you can't put a cap on how much you have actually loved. You can't put a cap on and say, okay, I've done my part. You cannot at first outlove God. That's one of the principles we see in the Bible. As much as God has sent his only son to die for you, you can't outlove him. And because of that, there's never a point to where we can say, I'm done. I've finished, I've reached a plateau, I've graduated, I'm forever finished with it, I don't have to go any further, it's done. I have loved as much as I have to love. His prayer is that their love would continue, and I love the language that he uses when he says, may abound yet more and more, overflowing love. It's never going to stop. It just keeps going and going and going. I think sometimes we have the problem, almost like a married couple, that when you finally are able to get married, and, we focus so much on the wedding in our culture. And don't be wrong, I have vivid memories of my wedding. Some of y'all do too. Some of y'all were there, and, vivid memories of my wedding. And it's just a pleasant thought, but people focus so much on the wedding to where they don't really think about what comes after that. How can you love each other and continue to grow in love as a spouse? And because we've lost the view of covenant commitment and covenant growth in marriage, we haven't really focused on that to where people don't know what to do. And so they get into a marriage and they're lost. And it's the same way with discipleship. People are so focused on how to get people in the pew, they're missing on how to get those people in the pew to grow. And here, Paul is looking and saying, you haven't loved to the point to where you can just abandon love. You haven't got to the point to where you have loved as much as you can and you can move on from this and be done with it. He says, no, you have to continue to work on this and pray that you abound and abound and abound. And the view here is, as he's saying abound, it's growing in different areas. Now, it is easy for me to love somebody that is very loving to me. It's easy for me to love my wife for so many different reasons. She's pretty, she's smart, she said yes. That there's so many reasons to love her. The poor girl's got bad eyesight, but past that, she's a real great gal. It was great to be at the beach all week with the best looking woman there, right? It was a blessing. It's easy to love her. Most of the time, it's also easy to love my children. I'm kidding. It's always easy to love them. But it's easy to love those who you would think we're supposed to love. You see, abounding more and more in love moves us past what we would consider an emotional aspect of love. Abounding more and more in love. You see, biblical love is more than just how we feel. It's more than just an emotion solicited because somebody gave us something that we desired. You see, my wife, I love her.